Today I have something special. We have a guest speaker. I sat down with him a couple months ago and we started talking. Very quickly I realized he has a story. No, it's not even just a story. There's a story there and you need to hear it, and it's important and it's inspiring. But Dave has a way about him. He thinks deeply, he feels deeply, and he has a sensitivity to him. He ran our discussion group on and off for years. He's actually our occupational health and safety representative, so if someone needs to get told something, he's the very nice guy to do it. He has a way of talking that I said, I want your voice on stage today. So give your kindest, most warming welcome to Dave Hill. Oh, what?
That's all right. Well, thank you, Vincent. Welcome to Friends, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks for that introduction, Vince. It's only when you start into preparing a message that you get an entirely new appreciation for what these guys do week in and week out and hitting it out of the park. They are rock stars, Jeff and Vince, and we are very lucky to have them. So just a big shout out to those guys. So I want to begin by painting a bit of a picture briefly. It's a situation where you may find yourself in a place where all that you held was true, trusted, all your experience validated, all that's in your belief system, all you held as fundamental truth, your values, your icons, all wrapped up in a bundle of relied upon results. And they've been rendered useless, meaningless. In fact, you experience emptiness. I had that experience a few years ago. I guess you could call it a faith crisis. It didn't happen all of a sudden, though, in one moment. There was a series of minor events and situations that began shaking my faith foundation. But I suppose one of the main catalysts for my faith crisis was something that was much more closer to home, more personal. One evening, while our youngest, at the time, Kevin, was 21, at the time still living at home with us as he went to school, and he casually mentioned to us that he liked to chat with his mom and I. We happened to be in the kitchen at the time, and I said, "Ooh, sounds ominous. Maybe I should put a pot of coffee on." "Yeah, maybe you should." "Oh, okay. It sounds kind of ominous." And so a flood of possible agenda items was going through my head. A financial problem, maybe a substance issue, a pregnant girlfriend, joining the French Foreign Legion. No, that wasn't Kevin. But I'm really curious. And I did put that pot of coffee on, and his mom and I sat at the table and we waited for his message to unfold, and we were hanging on every word as he spoke. He began by saying there's something he'd been struggling with for a long time, and he actually had been praying about that, and now he's at the point where he's comfortable sharing with us. And he explained to us that he realized that he was gay. Now, you have to realize that both his mom and I had zero inkling that this could be. Sometimes, you have a clue, but nothing for both of us. And I'm kind of glad that was the way it turned out anyways. But so our thinking was it possible to still have faith and be gay? And things racing through my mind. And so children come to you because they want to know how we're going to fix this, right? How are we going to fix? That's why parents come. But in fact, it wasn't a fix he was looking for. In fact, he shared that he was actually prayed about it and given a release from God, feeling that God was telling him, you're beautiful in exactly and precisely the way that you were made, no fixing required. What became clear to me in that moment was that he was looking for continued acceptance and love from us. And so instinctively as a mother guards and cares for their young, we of course embrace Kevin both physically and metaphorically in accepting this new reality. Not that our heads weren't still trying to grapple with that and all that this meant. Nothing could separate us from the love we had for Kevin. But Kevin also displayed great patience and grace with us, because subsequent to that, we suggested that, there's some really good reading material out there for treatment for his condition. And, okay, so we had some growing to do. We did. And by the way, a lot of that material pointed the source of this problem being the parents, and particularly the father not having a relationship. And so had to grapple with that too. And so after that seminal moment with Kevin, and our journey as God-fearing parents, we launched into the whole LGBTQ realm, and with many twists and turns along the way. And I had to ask myself, well, why is it such a big deal? I mean, we cross paths with gay people fairly frequently. It wasn't like it was 30, 40, 50 years ago when it was a big deal. I had an uncle that was gay. He died of AIDS in the 1980s. It was in our family. Didn't affect our family that significantly. So for some, it's just not an issue at all. It's just this. In fact, some of you are going, well, Dave, what's the big deal? In fact, I remember sharing with a colleague who had zero church background, zero fundamentalism. And he said, David, I can't really quite connect with your story, because I was sharing with him about the church and everything and Kevin coming out. He said, our daughter came out in her late teens, and our reaction was, great, when's the party? Can we come? Totally different reaction. So why? And I think the answer lies in a rigid faith context that was supported, held together with the church community. So I'm going to try and paint another picture for you, just how steep we were in this sort of conservatism. It wasn't too long before that our church had put together a petition, and this petition was going to the federal government because there was a pending bill that was going to actually allow same-sex marriage people with the same rights as heteros. And no, we signed against that. No, we can't have that. And so if you look in the realm, you'll probably find my signature and his mother's there going against it. Not the proudest moment. But you're in this world, and you do what and everybody's doing it, so let's show support. And that community would have a reaction, though, to Kevin's coming out, because it was only a couple weeks after that, and when Kevin had come out to his friends in the church, that there was a particularly damning sermon against the gay orientation, and delivered from the pulpit. And normally this wouldn't have been too big a deal, but now we had skin in the game, and we felt for the first time uncomfortably exposed, raw even. And I just want to point out that at this point, my wife and I, we were together. We were our own little mini support group in this. But our journeys kind of took different paths. And so I'm going to speak primarily from my side of the journey. I can't really speak for her so much. But we've arrived and ended up at the same place, but kind of took different routes maybe to get there. So primarily my comments will be about my journey. And to help understand and put some context and background around this, it's important to understand that it was a very, very conservative upbringing that I had. In fact, I was raised in a sect, I'm going to call it a sect, called the Plymouth Brethren, a fairly, relatively unknown species of the Christian umbrella. And in fact, I would say it's endangered, and maybe that's a good thing. And it involved rather some strict sort of interpretations of Scripture. Women, for example, had to have their heads covered in the main worship service. It was only men who could speak from the pulpit, only men in leadership positions. Just to confirm, that denomination, they do not do gay. So this was the structure. This was my life anchor. I was ready to die for my faith. And so was now I being asked to choose between the love for my son and my doctrinal positions? Why couldn't I just let this piece of theology slide? Surely there was wiggle room in some of the other stances that I had taken. Why couldn't I be a little more flexible on this one? Well, here's why. Because it involved my son, whom I loved. And And if God, the church, and the more than or what have you, didn't accept him, and they couldn't have us either. And that's where I was. That's where we were, it's Mom and I. So through a number of experiences that we had had with the church, we both came to the conclusion, the inexorable conclusion, that we had to leave. But when you leave a church, you're not just leaving the doctrine and some of the observances, theology. You're really leaving community. And that support network was significant and important. And to a large extent, that's what we were walking away from. The more I examined the doctrine, the more I realized how uncomfortable I was with the interpretation that I had previously accepted. So if I was wrong about that, so terribly wrong, what are other things that I was also very wrong about? So I started to examine the concepts of atonement, heaven, hell, baptism, prayer, the role of women, and many, many other issues. And in so many cases, I found that there was this man-made construct around these issues. Like God is sending billions of people, yes, billions with a B, to an eternal damnation because they haven't adopted Christianity. I mean, that's an atrocity which would represent orders of magnitude greater than anything that would have happened in the history of the world. And this being perpetrated by a loving God, I just couldn't be on that team. The house of cards that I had was falling down. Nothing left. Empty. So is my experience unique? I don't think so. I read about others for many reasons had left their faith. Many who had found themselves at a similar point for maybe other reasons, different avenues, different arenas, different situations. I think about that person who spent a vast amount of their time, effort, resources in getting an education, only to find that there's no work for them. That masters of engineering person who went through school for tremendous costs, studying midterms, finals, a thesis defense, all of that, promise of an exciting and engaging career, and all he can find is a job at the Costco distribution center, the graveyard shift, at minimum wage. Yes, it can feel that it's been useless. Or maybe you're a recent divorced person now trying to navigate a world with children on your own or new financial constraints. What about those commitments that were made to love, to forever, to fidelity? Where was that white picket fence with the children playing in the manicured yard? The family relationships, the in-laws, the fall holiday plans, the extended family? No longer. Gone, vaporized. Disappointment can be so overwhelming that there's not even any room for light or hope. So I started to spiral into this cynical view of my church life, my previous church life, and I even thought it was therapeutic if I took pot shots at it from afar, and I would sometimes watch with some cynicism some of these TV evangelistic programs. And I'd see people hearing the word of the Lord, all well-dressed in big auditoriums. But I began to notice some things I had never noticed before. Some language, even I would call it Christianese. I heard a phrase in that saying, so-and-so is under the anointing of God. I didn't know what that meant now. Not sure what that means. Or if somebody had sinned, well, they were subject to the influence of Satan and the principalities and powers roaming the earth. That sounds like a dystopian science fiction situation. Things are glossed over, like somebody who's really depressed, but it's just maybe, they're just feeling a spirit of heaviness. Some euphemisms like that mask some serious underlying issues. Or the question, are you having a victorious Christian life? And then there was this phrase about being in the center of God's will, something that I struggled with. For example, someone would share a story, I just got a job offer. It's twice the annual salary, great benefits. But I want to pray about it first and make sure that it's in the center of God's will. And invariably, guess what? God gave the green lights. And we were okay with that. Because I was just being obedient. It wasn't me. It was just this concept of obedience, another thing I was struggling with. So, I still felt that there was this God, this more than. And Gregory, I don't know, you must have got my notes here, because, it was like he's telling my story. And it's so cool that I'm not alone. And I still felt that there was this God, this concept, this more than, this power. It was everything, though. It was the good and the bad. It was all gender. It was mother and father. And I had a humorous what-if moment came into my head. What if, when I was doing a public prayer in my previous tradition, and I started it off with Heavenly Mother? There would be a mother of a problem with that. So I'm a bit angry at where I am now, because it was so much nicer being in the inside of the bubble. All the pat answers, everything figured out. Where was everything? Now there was nothing. It was empty. So I was at the point of abandoning everything. All my faith's tenets, all the belief systems, the rituals, the to-dos, all the shoulds. I wanted to expunge it from it. I wanted to throw it all away. But there was still a small voice within my soul that said, are you sure you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater? And by that I mean, it's kind of an old expression. For example, what if the Wright brothers, after that first flight, when they figured out how to fly a machine and they had a bit of a crash, and they decided, that idea, let's just throw that out. Maybe they had a bad experience. Maybe their baggage got lost. Or if you've got a computer program and there's some bugs in it. It's got a great value, but no, there's too many bugs, throw it all out. Or you've got a good friendship and you've got a good friend, but they have some really quirky little habits. So you're just going to end the friendship. That's what I mean. So here is where my journey took a bend in the road, a fork in the road. And something came to my mind, a memory. I had just finished reading a book recently called Soul Survivor by a guy by the name of Philip Yancey. It showcased about a dozen or so people who had made significant contributions to the spiritual world and in social causes, and even in the author's own life. So before I explain more about that, you need to know that in my tradition, spiritual truth resided only in those who were born again, and particularly those who had been ordained in the denomination, enjoyed good standing in the church. But any writings or preaching or any words from anyone other than that it was met with great wariness and doubt, even fear. At best, it would be labeled humanistic. I was even told to not keep certain books and materials in my house that challenged the Christian faith, because that could be a stronghold for Satan to get in. So this now bordered on the superstitious. So you can appreciate my dismay when, in reading that book, that this Christian author actually validated some of the concepts, new thinking, positions of some of the people, some of whom were not even Christians. Like, for instance, Gandhi. He spoke about his contributions spiritually. And there were even non-Protestants like Henry Nouwen or Shusaku Endo, who were Catholic writers and challenged their own faith and came up with some controversial writings. They spoke outside of their religion's manifestos. But they were helpful for people in their spiritual journeys. This book by Philip Yancey garnered quite a bit of pushback from the Christian community, as you could imagine. But there are also people like Martin Luther King Jr., who was also featured in that book, and of course had some glaring, personal issues and faults perhaps in the area of fidelity, but the author observes some remarkable achievements and influence, not only for him personally, but for society as a whole. How could it be that God could use these people and issues, they still have issues, and still do some great things? So, the penny was dropping for me. I was beginning to feel freedom to see faith in a whole new light. So my hardness began to soften. And my mind began to open up to the possibility of seeing that what might be worthwhile from my old traditions. Acknowledge, perhaps even incorporate some into a new spirituality. That sounds healthy. I took off the cynical lenses, tried to be more objective. Look at all the good that I received from the church. Growing up, I had many opportunities. I could speak, share, lead Bible study groups. I had leadership development in me, which I've used in my career and other areas of my life. Quite useful. I could see the influence of missionaries. I came from a long line of missionaries on my mother's side. These people dedicated their lives to going, and at great risk, to go to these remote places in the world to bring the good news. But what I saw was that they brought a lot more than just the good news. They brought vaccines. They brought health, nutrition. They brought skills like sewing. They brought ways that these people could become out of poverty and have a future. And yes, I could lay aside that good news message, which was always preceded by the very, very bad news that we were all going to hell. But nevertheless, the missionaries had the immunization for that. But leaving that aside, I could see there was a tremendous good. These people were dedicated. Wow, look what they did. I know missionaries who help people in very practical ways to come out of really dire situations. It's not all throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. So what about some of these traditions that I engaged in? Let's examine those. Let's take the simple thing of like saying grace before a meal. I have memories of long graces, people going on and on about irrelevant things, least of all the food that we're supposed to be thanking for. And yet, in some of those graces, I could see them acknowledging the hands that had prepared the food. It was a way to say, an attitude of gratitude with just what's happening here around the table. It's a point of connection. And it doesn't have to be in a grace. It's a way to toast one another and say, hey, this is great to be here. Thank you for providing this food. And just to note that moment in time that we're able to do this, I could get my head around that. What a great way to acknowledge each other and move forward. And what about these personal daily Bible readings and prayer time, these devotions they were called, that I was required to do as a Christian? I'd thrown that out, just the same way I'd thrown out the grace thing. But instead, what about taking time, instead of reading, just taking time to be quiet? Just look at that little exercise that Jeff led us in, meditating, being still, come away from the noise, being grateful. Wow. A sense of just being still, like the psalm says, be still. We've promoted that here a lot at Friends, and I could get my head around that. I don't know a psychiatrist that would say that's a bad idea. That's a good idea, even from a so-called secular point of view. And even reading books that stretch your mind. Instead of always going to the same, in my past tradition of the echo chamber of everything, everybody agreeing with the same stuff all over and over again, how about something that really stretches you? Like the messages here at Friends. So many times I've emerged from the spiritual gym going, wow, that just turned my head upside down. My thinking pattern's been challenged in a good and positive way, with no judgment. Making you take a look at new things. How can that be a bad thing? What about the notion of prayer? And you've heard Vince talk about, studies about the efficacy of prayer, but from what I could see, the value in prayer is somebody coming up to somebody else saying, man, I'm praying for you. I see you're going through a tough patch here. I just want to know I'm praying for you. Well, whether that guy actually prayed for him or not, the goodness of that message just helped him. And similarly, I can say, hey, I may not be praying for you, but I want to walk with you through this. I see you're going through a hard time. I'm going to imagine great outcomes for you. I want to be with you. Wow, there's power in that, both spiritually and quite literally, physically. That's something I could get my head around. I can build that into my new spirituality. And giving, The whole issue of giving. We had to tithe, get the calculator out and get that decimal point moved. Okay, that's how much you got to give. And I'm thinking, that's shift. I threw all that out too, because I couldn't give to the ideology that the church was proposing. And it also just seemed to go into this big church machine that just generated itself. And I remember one time sitting in a budget meeting going, where's the benevolence line? Where's the line that we've got $1 million budget and nobody who's hungry gets a sandwich? There was just so much of that. And I thought, no. And so, of course, we support Friends Church too, but there's also areas of giving. Children going to school hungry, vets coming back with PTSD. There's a million different things. And now the giving feels good again, like you're actually helping somebody. And the emphasis here on bringing water at Friends, I just love that. But what about the hymns? We just heard that reference to it earlier. The hymns. I love the hymns. These are not just songs, but anthems to the faith. But how can I sing some of those lyrics that don't align with my new spirituality? Let's throw out all of those too. Maybe not so fast. Maybe I can look at things a bit differently. So let's take that iconic Amazing Grace hymn, for example. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, saved a wretch like me. Well, have we not all been the beneficiaries of grace, regardless of a spiritual tradition? Have you not all individually experienced grace? Somebody reached out to you, and you could have had a really negative outcome, but for that person who extended you grace, from your colleagues, from friends, from family members, spouses, especially spouses, extend that grace, and you've been able to experience that. Now, the wretched part, the wretch like me, I don't see myself as a vile wretch, but I see it as perhaps a poetic license, as a way to emphasize just how poorly off I may have been were it not for somebody to extend that grace to me. And when you've been that fortunate to have that happen to you, and you know it, it is like you were blind and now you see. So I see that lyric a little bit differently, and I can sing that song in light of that new interpretation. I can appreciate that grace, that unmerited favor. I think it's part of our DNA. I think the Great One built it into us to extend that. Yes, these are all the rules, but I say, in this case, you get a pass. For no real reason, you haven't earned it, but just because. So what I discovered is that many of the things of the church, the pattern the church gave me, are things that I can apply, and perhaps in a different way, reconstruct my faith model. And maybe it's a different situation, like the examples I came with earlier with the Costco distribution job, where maybe you can look at all the good that you did do, not throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's disciplines, there's applications that can still be made where you are now. Or in terms of relationships where promises were broken. Both my sisters divorced their husbands in the evangelical church. Turns out not to be a good place for that to happen, particularly for women. But my sisters tell me that the good that came out of those relationships that they had, they learned things. They had children. They had experiences. And they had the agency to choose to leave, and the release they experienced from men's imposed guilt. They would not be the people today without those experiences. So maybe we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe we can salvage building materials from our negative experiences to build something new from the past. For me, this process has been, to paraphrase as Philip Yancey did, like getting spiritual oxygen into the airtight box of my stuck and limiting religion. And so to conclude, as in all the messages here at Friends, there's no should. You really need to think about what I've told you today. There is none of that. In the spiritual gym here, if there's a piece of spiritual equipment that you don't know how to work, like has happened to me many times, and I stand looking at that piece of equipment and I just can't figure out what I'm supposed to do with it. You know what? You can pass it by, and that's okay. One thing I've come to realize in the great design of this thing called life and the force that's behind it all, it just seems to be the design that our life is to be filled with highs and lows, challenges, accomplishments, suffering, and relief, and reconstruction projects like mine. I wonder often if the word life isn't an acronym that stands for living intensely for experiences. It's more about the here now than it is the hereafter. And I just want to finish this message. So this message is not about my son coming out. That was just a catalyst for me to see things in a bigger, inclusive, wider field, challenging thy status quo. It's being able to take those experiences, which you've all had, good and bad, mixed together and going on a scavenging hunt to find out what really worked in certain applications. A rebranding, if you like. So that's been part of my journey. It's been fun. It's been exciting. It is inclusive of everything and everyone, including me. So if those concepts resonate with you, great. And if not, that's great too. And I just thank you for hearing and listening to me today. Vince? Thank you.
Well done, well done. Tell me he didn't make that look easy, huh? May we live lives that have big swings, but may we watch the pendulum, and when it swings the other way, maybe there's something that we need to hold on to. Isn't that a great message? That one's going to sit with me for a while, because I tend to like to throw it all out and be done with it. Have a great week. See you guys next week. Enjoy the possible sun, possible rain. We'll see how it works. Hang out. There's no rush to get out of here. Hang out, visit, do whatever you want. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks.